Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I know it's the last day, and some of you are ready to get home. I always say Microsoft Ignite is a marathon, it's not a sprint. So thank you for getting to the end of the race. My name is 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗃. I go by Tony. I am the field CTO for cybersecurity and infrastructure at Cisco. I tend to go over private and public. I've had a long history. I've been doing cybersecurity for about 30 plus years. For all of this, old people in here, I started hacking back in the days when I was like 12 or 13 and doing back in MS-DOS and token ring, right? I worked in the Department of Defense, and then here, I've done other things, and here I am. You can look me up, and I'll let him go.
Hey everybody, I'm 𝗦𝗽𝗲𝗸𝗀𝗀𝗀. I'm the Director of Story Design, and everybody says, what does that even mean? And so my role at Microsoft is to work with our engineering teams and many of our partners to find out what are we technically doing, but then how can I turn that into something that's easier to understand? And what I'm thankful to be able to bring to you today, between me and Tony, is things that we've been talking about for years and not been able to share. And we're going to share some insights with you today that hopefully you'll be able to use immediately when you go back to your own companies.
And we started this whole conversation. When we met, I was a solutions architect at Ernst & Young, and he was with Microsoft, and we got called into an oil company, and that will remain nameless, right? And immediately we realized that we liked each other, and then also that clients don't really understand digital resilience. We talk about it a lot, but designing it is totally different. And remember the conversation, the guy says, I'm moving everything to Microsoft, right? And the people on Microsoft are like, yay! And I was like, great, how are you gonna get there? I said, it ain't magic, right? You got a lot of oil rigs, and you got a lot of satellite communication, you got a lot of brick and mortars. And I said, so how are you gonna get there? And he didn't really think about the switching and the routing and the telecom communications and that end-to-end visibility that you really need to do for digital resilience. And so him and I literally almost gave an education to CISO right away. And so this is kind of how we started it. This has been a dream of ours for a long time. We've been friends, and so if we're bad, don't give us a bad review. His boss is right there, so don't do that. Go ahead.
So Microsoft's obviously investing in massive scale. These numbers, every time I see them, they just get bigger. I was in Denmark last week, and they just launched a brand new data center in Denmark. And we see this because customers more and more need data to be local, resident. We'll go through a few things like governance, risk, and compliance. There's just this need for this kind of scale. And then to match that, we have the whole Cisco side of it too.
So we had this side built, because he put that Microsoft slide on. When he started building this deck, I was like, well, I'm going to put my Cisco stuff up there too. So the big thing about this is when we started, this was like, use what you got, right? So you have two of the largest companies in the world, right? And if you look here, we're or everywhere I've gone, you will always find Microsoft and Cisco. But they also don't leverage us to the full capability of you ever know that? You ever see the tools? They only use about 10% of their capability, right? But they're spending a lot of money, and then they're always like, well, I want to be resilient. And I'm like, well, use the tools to the full capability, and then you get defense in depth. That term. So when we talked about digital resilience, this is really what it is, right? You use what you got to be better, all right? You can do a little with a lot, all right? If you're masters of your craft and you're masters of your tools, you can actually do more. And so when you think about it and you look at Cisco and you look at Microsoft and you look at Splunk, by the way, anybody know that we were acquired, Splunk was acquired? When we're thinking about it, you think about that end-to-end visibility. You cannot do digital resilience without end-to-end visibility. But also, Cisco is foundational. Microsoft is foundational. Everybody uses it. Whether you like it or not, use what you can, and then find your gaps and buy something new, right? And address the gaps. And in the world of integrated data, if you think about that, the whole world now is, back in the day, everything was in our own data center. You remember back in the days when we go in and plug in? This world's not like that anymore. It's cloud computing. You don't even really know where your data is, right? When you go into the cloud, and we are changing that. There is definitely a thing to changing or make data more regional, but everything's integrated data. I think probably all of us in this room can look at a couple of examples in the last couple of years where integrated data, where one got me stuck at an airport. Anybody? You remember that one? Oh, he said I'm not allowed to say their names. And then the other one, I was in Brazil, and all of a sudden, my Starbucks app doesn't work. My wife was so mad. Anyway, so when you think about it, you got to think of it end to end. You got to understand that everything that we do is integrated. Data, you got to know where your data is at.
And the attackers also know where your data's at, unfortunately. And so things like phishing, this is a 2002 stat, took 72 minutes from when you get a successful phishing attack. Those numbers, though, as I said before, keep changing. So 72 minutes now, but with AI in 2025, that's more like a few minutes.
Sorry, yeah, he did that when I was drinking.
Picked you on purpose.
So the numbers right now is ransomware attack can get on any organizations in 5 to 8 minutes. It's 76.8% that once targeted by an APT, they will gain access. And then the number that scares me the most is that our success rate in cyber and IT ops and all the rest is only 36.2% to stop an attack. So that's as of current of 2025.
Yeah, so we want to teach you how to approach this problem that as you start thinking about AI and integrating AI, I just unfortunately just see these numbers increasing. Not only have we got more password attacks per second year on year, but the threat actors. And the interesting thing about the threat actors is while we have 1,500 of them, we say plus, because how many can you keep a track of with new ones coming up all the time and AI adding more skill uplift to the minor attackers becoming major attackers pretty quick and easy. So that's all the scare stuff. How do we actually approach it and do something useful? So I wrote a book on AI, and then for some crazy reason, I decided let's write a book on threat modeling. So threat modeling is an interesting conversation that because of AI, more and more people are thinking and talking about threat modeling. So when you investigate into what is threat modeling, I want to share this with you to take this with you and think about next time, if you're in security, you're not in security, we always just say everybody does security. If you're not at the table, ask for a seat at the table. We have the idea of shift left and shift right, but we also have architecture, which is the ideal blue sky world of how everything's going to be designed and done, but then we have on the ground, hands-on, how it actually happens in the real world. To map and understand whether you're being effective with the controls and the technologies you have, I get involved in a lot of the kind of assessment and analysis. The CISO is asking, what can AI do? How bad can it be? What controls do I need? We're really thinking about from a business perspective and then from a technical mapping perspective, what do I need in order to get this great technology into the hands of my business, but not at the cost? That's threat modeling. And then, so the real threat modeling comes down to the ones and the zeros and then the bytes of what technology do I have and how does that get attacked? And we'll go into like different kinds of models you can use, but the point of that is looking at the visibility and getting the testing and the hunting done. So if you're getting attacked, if you're seeing attacks, you should be able to go back to your threat models and say, did we know that was going to happen? Did we have a plan for it? Can we hunt it? So can we get our red team to do that? And then can I detect my red team? When you know what the attacks are, you can then start putting preventions in place. And we're going to talk some stuff about a security matrix. There are lots of different ways to defend against the attacker. It's not that the attacker has to get it right once and we have to get it right every time. There's a lot of things we can put in that pathway. So you have to do the preventions, but they should lead to better detections. And then those detections should improve your actual response capabilities. And if you look at our Secure Future initiative, we'll talk a lot about increasing the ability to log, identify, detect, and respond. And that is all about the idea of having like a risk register. And so the risk register is a continuous look at the threat landscape, but also your business's readiness to do something about it.
Yeah, and when I see this slide, and I saw him, when he showed it to me, and it's kind of incorporated this, and I said, you know, the one I really think about it is being proactive, not reactive. And cybersecurity, right, and also in operations, we've become reactive to the world, right? That's never what we were supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be proactive. We're supposed to build controls. We're supposed to get ahead of the problem, build a control so that we're resilient enough when we get attacked, right, that we can still make business and make revenue, right, and to provide jobs, right? And so the biggest thing when I think about this is like understanding your threat model, understanding your framework, whatever framework you're going to use, have a plan and get there, right? Now I tend to say, like when he put governance in there, and As a guy who I hated governance, right? Don't quote me. Well, I guess you are. I'm being strange, so God help me. I tend to like to automate it all because I don't like it when they come to me and then give me like this little checklist. And I said, it took me years to realize that I can actually incorporate governance at the very beginning. And if I incorporate it in the very beginning, then I'm more secure at the end. At the ingestion rate and the data owner, I'm able to secure. I don't have to wait until it gets to my SOC and then I have to react and then start a process of vulnerability. All right, so then when I see this slide, and I really loved it from him, and again, we pretty much talk every Friday, trying to conquer the world. We call ourselves Pinky in the Brain. I'm definitely the brain. But when I saw it, I was like, hey, man, I love this. And so he's going to go into it a little bit further.
Yeah, so inside Microsoft, we have this brilliant process that we have called hackathons. There you go. I nearly forgot what it was. And we have these brilliant hackathons, and I encourage you all to think about doing a hackathon in your own company. Just take time out of your busy day, get some people together in a room, and we do it for about a week. It's a long time, but it's really good to just stop thinking about your day-to-day job and come and think about something different. In that hackathon, we had quite the great breakthrough. Again, just another idea of assessing it. As you're thinking about the next thing you're going to put in place in your company, what is the business trying to do with that technology? I'm going to talk about AI mostly, because that's the one that triggers a lot of, we need data security, I need identity, I need data. So you think about the business analysis, like what could actually happen to the business, both from a success rate if we're good, but also the downsides of it. So the business is then involved in the monetary value and the ability to drive the needs. Then you've got the threat scenarios, and this is the bit that we really worked out. The communication difference between me being technical and being able to understand the actual threats and the attack paths, which will get really complicated really quickly, back to the business to explain to them why they have to take advantage of this and think about additional detections and protections, is a scenario. If you can show a newspaper article or a hack that's happened somewhere else, hopefully not at your own company, or something the red team has discovered, like under these circumstances, the red team can manipulate the system, that leads you down the better path of these attack paths. And then finally, what you're trying to do is build out this mitigation and remediation plan, and that's what you work towards all the time, is do we have the technologies in place to prevent the attacks that we've seen coming through? And this is just an ongoing process, but this makes it easier, my job, as to communicate it to different teams that might not be the security or might not be the database expert.
And this is really important, because everywhere I go, in my past, I've never not gotten into anything I've been pointed at. And I usually use the fact that people don't talk to each other, all right? And I tend to say, I use data to have a communication. You have to understand the end-to-end, all right? Because I'm always going to go at you where you're not ready, all right? And I'm going to use the fact that people don't talk to each other. And so when you think about threat modeling, you have to incorporate the entire length of the threat, and you have to understand the threat. And you also, you know, just recently I did a talk on third-party trust, and last year we've, I think it was the number was $468 billion was lost to third-party trust. And so when I talk to companies, I say, hey, you have to extend your threat. If you do a trust with that company, well, no matter who it is, you have to extend your threat matrix. You have to extend your threat model. You have to understand what is it that they're doing, right? Because usually it's just the IAM team doing an SLA and you don't actually understand, and they do create a trust. The financial companies are really good at this, all right? Because they're like, hey, look, I have a standard, FCC requirements and all that stuff, and they said, you have to meet my standard before I will commit trust. But when you look at other companies, they tend to say, oh, I'm going to acquire them, and then they do a mail merge, all right? Yeah, we've all been there, all right? So you have to understand your threat modeling from, I always call it like the life of the packet. Understand the path of the packet will help you with your threat.
Another part of that is also who you're talking to at each time. So I get a lovely range of audiences, and not everyone's on the same page, even understanding what the technologies can or can't do, but also what our responsibilities are towards that. Like, isn't somebody else dealing with that? And generally you find they're not. So business leaders are there to understand really about that money and the mission, and that's that analysis phase, all the way through the technology leaders. You see practitioners of security are just somewhere in the middle. They're not the actual implementers, and they're also not the decision makers all the time, but they're ultimately responsible for trying to make sure the world's secure. So they need to engage with technology and business leaders, but also the security experts that are, or the technology experts that are implementing, and even legal, HR, and finance because of procurement, the ability to change the culture, which again, we're going through as a whole, making sure security is the main thing people are considering. And along the bottom, you'll see the idea of doing risk analysis, threat modeling, and different kinds of mitigations. So I'm just encouraging you all to think more about what can we do to improve resilience. Really comes down to that understanding what can go wrong and what could we be doing to prevent it, but also react to it when it finally gets there. We did some mapping, and it's a lot of work. So I'm showing you one, a new framework, let's say. There's lots of frameworks out there already. So I encourage you all to write a book too. So if you write a book, you actually have to do the research, the studying, the writing. And I've found that the simplest method we can get for any threat modeling, if you want to take this one with you, is just this A3 method. If you know what the asset is, you know what the access to the asset is, and then you know what the actor is, that's the legitimate one, but also maybe a nefarious one. Those are the three basic concepts of any threat model. I know how to protect it, I know how to get access to it. What if something else happens? Then you've got STRIDE, MITRE ATT&CK, NIST CSF. If you really want to get into the nuts and bolts, it's NIST SP483 controls. And then what we'll talk about is this idea of a security matrix, which is something we've been developing for years, but you could easily create in your own companies as you think about the next purchase, procurement, buying tools, implementing something. This matrix is what we'll go on to next.
Yeah, and I think we'll show it to you as toward the last slide, because whenever you do a talk, it's always about concept and functional outcome. So we want to get you to that functional outcome and understand the life of the packet, understand how we've done it, so that you can take it back and you can do it yourselves.
We launched this last week, so I encourage you all to read it. It's the Secure Future Initiative, and we actually went through that process of saying, well, we've got another framework called the Secure Future Initiative. You can please go read the report, see how we're doing. We got to 99.6% deployment of fish-resistant multi-factor MFA, which a company of Microsoft's size and complexity is an amazing work. But there's so many other statistics in there. That's just my favorite one. And we mapped it to NIST CSF. And so you can see there's another mapping of trying to see that it's not something new we're doing. It's just a new lens on it, a new way of looking at how to tackle a problem, prioritize our needs. But NIST CSF is there to keep guiding you down those pathways. So just one way that you can do that kind of cross-mapping. One more way to look at this is that whole shift left, shift right, proactive and reactive. As you're thinking about AI specifically, take a look at threat modeling for AI risks really early on in the development phase. One, should you even use generative AI in your designs? That's, for some companies, could have just done automation. They could have just done some kind of AI like machine learning. Generative AI is one of those ones where you need to know when you're applying that yourself versus something like using a copilot that's already been designed and developed for you. Then we get to the testing and measuring. It changes all the time, so you have to keep looking at different tests and different applications, which might require some new tools. Really encourage a red team, and if you've got red teams, make sure they're learning the AI specifics. And then as we get into production, and finally the thing is running in live, well, now we're into safety and security incidents that are going to happen as well. And
so this is really important. I just, a couple of months ago, I still surfed the dark web doing things, and when I saw this, I want to tell you about an episode. You guys want to hear a story? I like stories, right? Even though he's paid to be the storyteller. I was on there, and then this guy showed a really cool video, and what it was, he was a white hat, and he targeted a pharmaceutical company, and he goes, hey, he took a job as a janitor, right? So he went in again, but he couldn't get into the data center because of biometric controls. Couldn't get in there. But there was a little desk in the front called the receptionist. So he sat down, and he videotaped this whole thing with his phone, which I thought was pretty cool. And the receptionist desk had cache permissions, so that was really easy to bypass, got in, logged in as a receptionist. Now here's where we get the problem. You saw a little blinking icon on the top left-hand corner, and it said AI, right? So he takes up AI, and he says, hey, look, and he's got the persona as a receptionist, and he says, hey, can you, he was testing it, and he goes, can you give me the last 90 days of financial transactions for this company? AI goes, absolutely. Would you like it in CSV, PDF, or PowerPoint? All right, now this is the receptionist now. And so then he turns around and he goes, well, what are the top 5 producing drugs of this company? And so he goes, went down the top 5, and he goes, can you give me the formulas? And AI comes back, absolutely not. You're not authorized. That's confidential information. Would you like a screenshot? All right. It didn't know the difference between that did the formulas and the screenshots, but it was trying to be helpful. We've been talking about zero trust for the last 5 to 10 years, and we're deploying AI at an extravagant rate. The Pandora's box is out, right? There's no way we're ever going to get there. And so this is the reason why I saw that story, and I was like, I'm going to talk about that, because it explains it, and it scares the crap out of me, right? And so when we think about this, when we think about measuring resilient networks, we really think about how do we measure it, and usually it's around GRC, right? We're talking about governance, regulatory, and compliance systems around the world, because that's how they measure resilience. The countries are building all these frameworks, and they're saying, hey, look, you got to do this. Everybody's in their world ever done with GDPR, or here we are in California doing CCPA, right? It's kind of a little nightmare. But that's how they measure the resiliencies, and that feeds into their cyber insurance. And so understanding all of this makes them part of the conversation. We have to make them part of our thing. Now, in the military, remember I told you I came from the military? The next slide. We tend to look at everything as a resilient system. We look at a layer of parts. We don't have the ability to say, well, that's really not my problem, all right? Because we have to go from kernel to cloud, and we have to go from the warfighter on the ground to space. And everything has to be protected, because one of the things is we have nation state and we have loss of life. Loss of life always drives everything. Now, I came from the Joint Special Operations Command, and we had to understand each and every layer of that, because we tend to use a lot of new cool technology. Anybody play Call of Duty in here? Come on, old people. All right, thank you. All right, so you know a lot of that stuff it came from what we do already. And we were doing drones 20 years ago, right? And every warfighter in the world was going, oh, I'm going to go use this cool thing. And I'm like, well, that has an IP. I need to secure it, right? And that's how I ended up buying Splunk. And initially was because I said I needed an all-seeing eye that could talk to anything. But then also turned around and went, I didn't have a lot of money. This is back in the days when cybersecurity was called IEM. Anybody remember that, information assurance? And so I'm educating as I'm doing it, and that's when we started doing it. I said, I need to make a resilient system, and I went to the network guys, and I said, hey, can I have access to SolarWinds? I need your IPAM, I need your NCM, I need your NPM, I need build policies. I went to Microsoft, the IT ops guys, and I said, hey, I need to get down in the registry. Can I get your regjet? All right, I need to be an admin so that I can build policies that I can block. That's when I started looking at it. And then, so it became building in, because I'm always thinking about how I would get in, right? Next slide. And when you think about this, and I use the Navy network, because I find the Navy network to be the most complicated, but also tends to be the most resilient. Anybody seen those big YouTube videos of the battle groups? Right? It's how we project power around the world. But for all that to work in, and the Navy is trained that everybody on the ship has a purpose and a place. And I always tend to equate that to our organizations, right? Because I tend to go and I do a lot of IR as a Phil CTO, I'm kind of like the consultant nobody has to pay for, so thank you. I go in there and I'm like, why didn't you have a conversation with them? Well, I'm network. I don't talk to IT ops, and nobody talks to cybersecurity, and everybody hates GRC. Right? So what happens is everybody's doing things in silos, and now you're not truly resilient. So in the Navy, we don't have that opportunity. The ship doesn't get underway unless the engineers do what they're supposed to do. The communications has to get under. Somebody has to drive, the bosun mate has to drive the boat. So when you think about it, everybody has to work in tandem. And when we build our networks, it has to be resilient. We have to build it. And granted, I know all your companies are not going to have those kind of funds, and that's okay. Start back down to the foundations, kind of like what he was talking about with threat modeling. Understand your threat, understand the technology that you use the foundational technology that is, break out of your silos between IT, cyber, and NetOps, and use what you have, because that's kind of how we do it. In the Navy, I never can sit there and say, I'm like, hey, I need help. He says, I'm here to help you. There's never like, well, that's not my job. Because at the end of the day, we all have to defend the ship. And if the ship goes down, everybody goes down with it, right? Just like this. And if you think about it, anybody see the The hack just happened a few months ago with North Korea to the cryptocurrency. It is the largest hack in history, $1.6 billion. All right? The aggressors are getting better. AI is a part of that. All right? They're getting better every day. Now, when we think about AI, I wanted to build this slide out here for this and kind of show you how both of our companies are approaching it. We're going at it from an outcome-based approach. We see problems, we're solving the problems so that we can enhance our defenders and enhance everybody in their normal day jobs, right? And you guys can, I would encourage you to go through. I think anybody in here have Copilot? Come on, you're at Microsoft tonight. Say, raise your hand, right? And then anybody in here have Cisco at their organization? Yeah, use what we have. It's there, right? We're solving a problem. We're throwing a lot of resources at it, and so that we can solve the problems of tomorrow for today. Because what we're seeing is, and one of the things I always tell people is, you can always reduce risk by understanding controls, but you will never reduce threat. Threat will always evolve, right? There are some really cool AI hacks that are coming out. It will evolve, and we have to be ready. And that's kind of why I wanted to throw this slide is understanding your ecosystem and don't silo. Whether you're from the lowest to the highest, it doesn't matter. Talk to your peers, right? They own the network. They own the data, right? Be proactive, not reactive. And AI in itself, remember the story I told you? That wasn't malicious. It was built because we're all rushing to like the lemons running off the cliff, right? With AI, we need to know how to build a bridge so that we don't fall off the cliff.
And the thing I would add here, there's been so many announcements this week, it's hard to keep up with all the news. But if you look at what we've done with Security Copilot, Purview, Microsoft Fabric, and whatever your favorite technology is, we've probably got some update in there. So I recommend going back and look at the Ignite news, the changes. A lot of that, though, is trying to skill up and enable the next generation. So there's so much going on that it's hard to keep a track of it all. That's kind of where our talk started, is the idea that there's a lot of tools. You need to know how to manage them. 58% of organizations have at least 40 tools. Some of them are actually in the hundreds. So go back and look at your tooling across your company and think, how can we simplify that down or get them to work together better and have them integrated? And the AI can help out with that, because the AI can, if the AI is integrated well enough, it will help the user understand how to use that user interface or take data from one place to another. But the 4 million missing security pros, we want people to get into this industry and enjoy it. And that's where the storytelling comes, is make this something that we can all make security better. And it's very hard to keep track of 250 different regulated updates every single day. So you need tooling, you need the AI, and you need the simplicity that comes in a complex world. So finally, one of the last things I want to tell you about is the idea of the security matrix, which we mentioned before. After you've done everything else with all the existing frameworks and the tooling and the conversations, it comes down to, this is a spreadsheet. And you can do something more complicated and fancy if you want, but at least start with something like this spreadsheet. And I've got lots of iterations of something like this, where you might list all of the products that you've got from Microsoft, and then list all of the products that you got from Cisco, and then go along the top and think about, what are all the problems I'm trying to solve? I've got data, identity, networks, I've got this AI that I've got to manage and handle. So as you list out all the problems and you list out all the products, you start to build up this mapping.
Yeah, when we built this out, the whole point is like optimize what you have, right? If you have 40 tools that are optimized and masterful, you don't need. I've been in companies where they had over 250 tools, and so it was beating up their network so hard that the client couldn't log in. I was like, you're beating up your network so hard. Understand what you got, right? Look at it from the entire ecosystem. Believe it or not, this is like real stuff that we've done, so that the slide on the Excel document, I don't think in PowerPoint. Right, I tend to think in, probably on the screen you'll see, is I see Visio and I think Excel, right? Anybody in here use Excel? Isn't that right? We don't really do PowerPoint in our jobs. And so I wanted to build it in a way that can be interactive and whatever. And then Splunk took it to the next level and turned this into a dashboard. But then when I did this for this company, and leveraging us, this is our Friday meetings, like trying to help people. The CISO ended up calling me and said, hey, look, you just saved me 32% on my cyber insurance. And I'm looking at turning things off because I'm now able to see the tools across the entire ecosystem mapping into controls. And because I have, instead of buying tools for single use, I'm looking at platforms and I'm looking at multiple use, and now I have end-to-end visibility and I can do business criticality. Now I know which ones are more critical than others. Not everything's equal in the ecosystem, right? From a ransomware attack, they will know your network better than you. They wait, right? They'll map you. They'll figure out what is the most critical point, and they'll go after that. It doesn't matter if they get after the endpoints. If they get their business criticality, you're done, right? Again, you can get on now, it's about 5 to 8 minutes, right? And we can talk about that. And then I would also challenge you, take a look at the bottom. Like, think of the end-to-end. When you're thinking about threat modeling, it's one thing to see that whole circle and map it into a control set, but understand that every piece of that path of the packet needs to be understood, and you need to see those controls. You cannot have true resiliency without having end-to-end visibility. It's just not possible, right? We need to be more proactive, not reactive. We can't just keep seeing things and then saying, oops, well, we have an exploit. It doesn't work like that, right? Companies are disappearing. Remember I told you about the North Korea? The company they targeted is gone. It's gone. It's not there anymore. All those people's lives who put their money in that cryptocurrency, they don't get that money back because they don't insure cryptocurrency companies, right? So keep that in mind.
Yeah, and that's how we're going to wrap up this session. So thank you all very much. But the idea is, yeah, break down those silos, work across teams, make sure that you have a full understanding of, I'm going to say, threat modeling, but also to build out that resilient network that something is going to fail, even if it's not attacked by an attacker. Things can just go wrong. So when they do, build out something that's actually going to sustain. And thank you for the partnership.
Thank you for being here, and I'm on this last day of Microsoft Ignite.
Thank you.
Right?